Oh yes, just to, I congratulate Professor Dr. Deswal, Pramod Deswal, for giving us this opportunity. And ours is a center of say 50 years old, and the center is looking after the dynamics in the South Asia, particularly, and India and Nepal relationship. This is the area study center, and we are happy to have such kind of collaborations and say research as well as international relations studies. So I'm sorry because my dean is a bit late and is going to join soon. And I would like to start with my own 5 minutes, 7 minutes, say presentation. Myself is Mrutyunjay Mishra, and I'm a student of economics, and I pursue in the field of environment economics. That's why we have chosen this particular session to be present and to host it. So you see that it's a climate change. In the language of economics, this is the global externality, in which in economics we define externality as a phenomenon in which it is defined as an unintended externality. And the very particular theme is important in the sense of the Trans-Himalayan region, because the Himalayan region is unique in its character. And this climate change being an externality, addressing the situation that there should be global, say, cooperation and support to mitigate this process of climate change, and there should be the cooperation for adaptation and mitigation, as well as to overcome the difficulties. Very recently, that NASA report has threatened the economy of the South Asia, because many of our cities, coastal cities and other habitation are in the brink of, say, submergence in the sea, and there is a lot of danger. So I would like to limit my, say, few words in the context of this Himalayan region, in which it is unique in its character, because this is the roof of the, say, world and the water tower of Asia, because 10 great rivers and large river basins owe their origin to this Himalayan region. And very recently in India, we have seen Uttarakhand, lot of havoc caused by the natural disasters, especially the burst of the glacier and the, what we can say, the flood and the flash flood, as well as what you can think of what you can say, emergency situations. Now you see, this climate change economics is basically characterized by two important, say, aspects. One is the uncertainty, and the other is the irreversibility. The impact of climate change is uncertain. Uncertain in the sense we cannot ensure that. So we do not know where it will happen, how it will happen, how much will be the large or small the impact, and when it will happen. So it is time dimension uncertainty, spatial uncertainty, and the impact, the degree of impact uncertainty leads to very difficult situations in understanding the dynamics, and especially the Trans-Himalayan region inhabited by 1.5 billion people, with two emerging large economies of the globe, India and China, are not yet prepared to face this challenge. And the irreversibility, in the sense, the irreversibility is a thing that once the loss happens, it cannot be recovered, and we cannot come back to the, what you can say, its original position, and therefore there will be the loss forever. So taking this into consideration, the impact is very large. Large in the sense, we'll find that there is a threatening to the livelihood of the people, and basically the people are poor people living in this particular region, the Himalayan, Trans-Himalayan region. And when we talk of that, there is a lot of biodiversity. It's a biodiversity rich area, and a lot of this flora and fauna are in an endemic say situation. And when this climate change in its present form will proceed, will take further, then definitely there will be loss in the context. So when we talk of economics, we talk of a kind of damage cost and the abatement cost, and the abatement or control cost is very difficult on the part of the poorer region to meet. And therefore, there should be a cooperation among the people, especially the global partners, to overcome this difficulty and to solve this situation. Thank you very much. This much from my side. My being joined now, Pramodji, I would like to request you to listen one or two sentences from him in the beginning, so that we can proceed further. Thank you, Pramodji. It is up to you now.
So please unmute yourself. You have got muted.
Dean sir, you unmute yourself and please speak some few words.
KK sir has got disconnected now.
Hello, Pramodji.
Yes, sir.
Shall I proceed or you will carry out the program?
Proceed. Please proceed, sir.
Sir?
Please proceed.
Okay. Now, I would like to invite my Dean, Professor K.K. Mishra.
He has got disconnected. Maybe we can move with the next.
Okay. Then let us ask the next speaker, Professor Manoj Kumar Mishra from Malaviya Center for Peace Research, from Banaras University, Faculty of Social Sciences.
Thank you, Professor Mrutyunjay Mishra, and thank you, NIS, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak in this very high esteemed international seminar, 3 days continuing. My topic is basically environmental degradation in Nepal, a sustainable development agenda. So in this, I'm just trying to analyze that what is the environmental degradation which is taking place in Nepal in the last few decades, and can we have a sustainable agenda in the future to improve the conditions in Nepal? So environmental degradation is a very big problem in Nepal, which is causing human health hazards, particularly due to the creation and disposal of pollution, sound, heat, and wastes. So Nepal is one of the least developed countries of the world, having natural resources such as land and forest as the main source of livelihood, and a large proportion of the population. Poverty is intimately related to the environmental degradation and loss of biodiversity. Poor people have no choice but to engage in the unsustainable use of natural resources, and Nepal is no exception to this. Now let's come to my 6 points I'm trying to analyze one by one. Now let's come to the soil. The result is the accelerated soil erosion, land degradation, and declining productivity of farmland and sedimentation in the downstream areas. The fast population growth has led to the rapid increase in the demand for fuel, timber, fodder, and the growth of food supplies. Forest is a clear and converted agriculture, and there's a processing going on. There is another problem in Nepal is frequent landslides, contributing to the environmental degradation. 75% of the landslides in Nepal occur naturally, However, there are also landslides triggered by both natural and anthropogenic causes in the mid hills discovered by natural large-scale occur frequently. On the other hand, there is a sharp decrease in the significant population of lichens, biofluids, algae, freshwater, and particularly fish, which has eliminated the air pollution, pose a serious threat to many birds and mammals. It has also been found out that 40% of the forest fires in Nepal are started accidentally and 60% are started deliberately. Accidental causes increase carelessness due to cigarettes and matches.
Manoj sir, you got muted. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. So uncontrollable overgrazing of the livestock directly affects the species composition and productivity of the grassland vegetation due to relative preference of plants and animals. So the lack of awareness of ecological function and wetlands among countries who depend upon the large scale contributes to the degradation. In this way, environmental degradation is a big problem in Nepal, particularly in Kathmandu Valley, which is causing human health and other hazards, and particularly due to air, water, sound, heat, industrial waste, garbage, and pollution. So I just gave you a slight idea about the problems of environmental degradation which is taking place in Nepal. Now, the second part of my presentation is, can there be a sustainable development agenda for this degradation? So, as you know, that Sustainable Development Goal (SDGs) succeeded the Millennium Development Goals and completely unfinished business to include some of the agendas. The main agendas are to eradicate poverty, education, health, environment, inequalities, peace, and inclusive society, and shift from the world on a path of sustainable development by 2030. So Nepal has worked upon the sustainable development, the 17 sustainable development goals, 169 targets and 230 indicators. And they are working on the 5P strategy. First is the people, end poverty and hunger in all forms and to ensure dignity and equality. 2 is prosperity, ensures prosperous and fulfilling lives and harmony of the nature. 3 is peace, peaceful, just and inclusive societies for all. Partnership, including both the NGOs and government coming together, and planet is to protect the natural resources and climate for the future generations. So this is what I have been trying to focus on. And can the Sustainable Development Challenge can be implemented? So the SDGs are ambitious programs challenging the goals and require a huge resources as well as capacity to enhance and to achieve all the, and there are hardly 9 years left by 2030. But Nepal has set out to in the long-term aspect. Now, first, let's see that is there a budget? Budgetary allocation is needed to concerning respect to every periodic development plan for SDGs perspectives. Prioritization should be done in ranks such as priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3, which can be done for betterment within the targets and indicators, including financing and resource allocation. Strong monitoring is also required with a credible database is crucial for succeeding of the SDGs. The existing statistical system is marred with various problems such as data resources, spread of multi-windows and other census and economic surveys, social and governance related surveys being outside the purview of Central Bureau of Statistical. So the data revolution should take place in Nepal, and strict monitoring and should be done in order to achieve the SDGs. And lastly, we can have international support, national government support, and so that the capacity constraints are not impeded and achieve the SDG despite commitments, resource availability, and willingness to carry forward the agenda. So the SDGs is achievable, however, they require a lot of concentrated and coordinated and combined effort. It is appropriate supply-demand side policies such as practical, educational, vocational programs and techniques should be implemented. Illiteracy rates should drop, and the people should be more aware of the social environment surroundings, which contribute significantly to the rise of environmental, social, and economic awareness. Stable government should prioritize the growth of GDP measures by usual methods and have to come up with the power to use the budget efficiently to invest in green energies, health services, and benefit systems, among others. To sum up, it displays as well as that the SDGs is achievable and straightforward. However, each of us should underline above that it's difficult to get. Like government and non-government organizations should be dedicated in achieving it. The future doesn't seem to be that bright in Nepal, but in another 9 years' time, we can still achieve this these SDGs goals to a certain extent. And the government and the Nepali citizens and the international community should decide on how to plan it out. Thank you. Thank you, sir. This is my presentation.
Manoj sir, please unmute yourself.
Just finished my presentation now.
So maybe we can move to next.
Yeah, next speaker.
RK Mal. Sir, kindly go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sir, our chair has got disconnected. So I would like to request Professor R. Kemal, Professor and Dean of Institute of Environment and Sustainable Development, and he will be speaking on climate change and Indian subcontinent perspective. So kindly go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just sharing my slides.
Thank you, Malji. Please.
Starting this, I'm trying to share my slides. Are you? I am audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are.
Just 1 minute.
Professor Mal, maybe we can help you with the slides. If you can send us by email, or maybe we can help you. There's a green button. Could you please press that?
Yeah, I was trying this. It's not permission. So.
No. Please press the green button and then select the slide. First, you have to open the slide and then press the green button.
Yeah.
And then when you press the green button, there are options. So in the options, you can see your slide.
Some restrictions are there. It is not allowing us to share.
Some restrictions are there. So.
Sorry?
Some restrictions are there to not allowing this.
No, we have made you co-host now. So could you please email us and we'll play it for you?
Yeah, sure.
please email. I'm sharing it on the chat box, and maybe we can move with the next speaker. I think Sanjay sir has not joined, so maybe we can go with Dr. Pallavi Roy.
Thank you so much, Pramodji. We are presenting as a duo from SOAS, and the first part of the presentation is going to be made by Professor Mushtaq Khan. Mushtaq, are you on? Once you finish, then I'll come on. That's how we had planned it, Pramodji.
So I'll begin then. And then, as Dr. Roy said, she will continue with this presentation because it's a joint presentation. So our work, what we are reporting is some work we are doing together with our partners, PEI in Nepal. And thank you, Pramodji and NICE, for inviting us to present this ongoing work. And thank you, Chair. This work is really trying to ask the question, what are the opportunities and challenges for LDC developing country like Nepal? And we also understand that this has to be understood in the context of global partnerships, because developing countries can't address the climate change issues facing them on their own. So what are the nature of these partnerships and what are the best ways forward? We've already heard that the climate challenge in essence is what economists call an externality problem, which basically means that the excess production of carbon and the adverse climate effects that we have seen because it is privately profitable to behave in those ways, and private profit and the market will not on its own solve the problems of the climate challenge. This is a really profound observation because it immediately brings to the fore two very important issues. One is there is an immediate financial cost of meeting the challenge of cutting down carbon emissions or adapting to the problems. And secondly, by its very nature, because it requires government action, the capacities of governments are very important in addressing the type of problem that you face. Now, in both those respects, the economic capacity and the capacity of states and administrations of dealing with it, developing countries are more challenged than more advanced countries. And obviously, there are a whole range of developing countries. So I'm going to present some general issues, and then Dr. Roy will talk about some specific issues in Nepal. So looking first at the economics of it, dealing with externalities have obviously got immediate economic costs to change the nature of technologies, to cut down carbon emissions, to tax polluters, and a whole range of other such interventions. These immediately cause effects on economic growth, on job creation, and so on. And to counter that, the governments of advanced countries have developed programs which create new job opportunities and new opportunities for creating new technologies. And in advanced countries, the debate is how to shift from an economy where innovation has been in conventional technologies to one where the innovation is driven by the new green technologies like solar power, battery technologies, wind power, and new forms of heating and generating energy. These are very technology-intensive applications involving large-scale R&D. And for advanced countries, that shift offers opportunities for new forms of job creation and wealth creation. And our starting point is that those opportunities are different for developing countries, and there are different challenges. So this is the first economic difference between more advanced and less advanced countries. And the second issue that we want to highlight is that the agencies which are implementing this, the states in developing countries, are also less well organized and have weaker implementation capacities and more subject to all kinds of leakages and weaknesses, which are well known, even with conventional technologies, for example, in the way in which industrial policy is organized. And when it comes to green technologies, those problems will not go away. So we have to construct our strategies given the reality of states and governments as we find it. Now, here, immediately, if you're looking for opportunities in developing countries, the starting point is that those opportunities have to be consistent with economic and development, because these are poor countries. You cannot have a strategy that saves the environment at the cost of jobs and growing welfare of already poor people. Already jobs are very scarce. Already there are very low wages. So the shift to greener technologies have to be aligned with at least keeping to the current situation, but even accelerating the development of wages and jobs and so on. And so what are those opportunities? And secondly, therefore, given the nature of the public policy required, the strategy also has to be consistent with the capabilities of the state and what the state can do in these developing country contexts. Now, here, I want to raise a number of broad issues, and then Dr. Roy will go into it in some more detail. The first is that obviously there is a difference between what we call mitigation strategies, which are largely about creating new technologies that reduce carbon, mainly, but not only, and adaptation strategies, which are about how to create resilience and dealing with the effects of climate change. Now, in developing countries, actually, the adaptation strategies are economically more attractive because they are employment generating. For example, changing the nature of farming practices, using terracing, building embankments on rivers, changing the nature of housing and sewage systems so that they're more climate resilient. These kinds of activities are not the high-tech kind of things that people think of in terms of green technology. They're labor using, they're actually old technology, but designed in a more scientific way to be adaptation strategies. And we believe that these are very important opportunities for developing countries, both to generate jobs, but also to deal with the effects of climate change. Here too, the capacity of states is very important because large-scale infrastructure projects in developing countries are subject to a lot of corruption and leakages, and we know that. But some of our research is also about identifying ways in which those kinds of leakages can be reduced by mobilizing influential people in local communities to do the monitoring of these infrastructure projects so that in their own self-interest, these kinds of leakages and state limitations can be addressed. So this is one part of our research. But coming to the mitigation investments, the genuinely new technology investments, here our assessment of the international situation is that the investment in this is much more attractive for more advanced countries, which can actually do the investments in R&D and benefit from the new production systems of things like I've already mentioned, battery, solar, wind, and so on. Where does the developing country fit into these new technologies? Now, there are three elements here, which I'm going to quickly go through. The first is that because of this massive public investment in R&D in advanced countries, some of these new technologies might become so cost effective that it becomes economically efficient to adopt them anyway. In other words, it no longer requires public action in the developing country. The market process will lead to that. So for example, some of these solar energy and so on, so much has been invested by public money in advanced countries that these technologies are now becoming cheaper than some of the fossil fuel technologies. So this is the easy win. So if you shift from some kinds of fossil fuel to some forms of solar and wind power, it's still not there yet, but we can envisage in a few years that actually it will be cheaper in terms of the cost of generating power. This is not really a problem because this will happen anyway. It doesn't require any further attention in developing countries. However, from the perspective of development partners, they're also trying to develop markets for these products in developing countries. And there is also an appetite in developing countries to look at the import of green technologies like solar and battery power and electric cars and all of this as a contribution to the greening of development. What we want to highlight here is that this is a little problematic and may not be a sustainable strategy on its own for developing countries, because the beneficiaries of this will really be, from a developing country perspective, the importers and installers of imported technology, right? So if you're thinking of Nepal, it's unlikely that Nepal will produce the solar cells or the battery powers or the electric cars on its own. So, but if there's a shift towards that and there is IFI support and loans available, a lot of money will be invested in importing these components from other countries. The beneficiaries in Nepal might be the importers and installers, but the long-run sustainability and the long-run impact on development might be a lot less, because remember, we are looking for solutions which also create sustainable jobs and sustainable businesses in these developing countries. So that takes us to the third component, which is, can the developing country actually begin to manufacture some of the components that goes into these new technologies? Now, for LDCs like Nepal, it's very unlikely that they will rapidly go into making the solar cells, but there are lots of other components that go into making solar cell systems. So there are switches and wires and boxes and all kinds of other components that go into it. And here the challenge is fitting the developing country in time into global supply chains so that that country actually benefits not only just as a consumer of these new technologies, but also as producers, and eventually more and more of these components can be made in that country. Here is where the real challenge of green growth is, in our opinion, because this requires actually combining the green strategy with industrial policy and with identifying the points in the global supply chain that a country like Nepal could fit into, given that the competitiveness of firms in Nepal and most LDCs is, and even many developing countries, is largely very low, that other forms of industrial policy haven't made a great deal of progress, and a lot of industrial policy, for example, in the form of loans and subsidies and so on, tends to get captured by infant industries, which don't actually often graduate to become competitive industries. And this capture is because of the political economy of developing countries, where firms can, for example, take loans and not repay them, and it's very difficult to recover those loans, and all those sorts of things which political economists like ourselves study. So here the challenge is finding ways of linking emerging domestic companies producing these components to global supply chains with forms of industrial policy that actually are effective given the local political economy and the capacities of the local state. So it is actually a much more difficult job than may appear at first sight, but we think that if we understand the challenges properly, there are actually many opportunities here which we shouldn't miss. So to conclude, a sustainable green growth strategy, and this is what we are working on and will continue to work on in Nepal in the coming years, has to have both based on an analysis of the feasibility of domestic production and the feasibility of the state in supporting these kinds of new technologies. And we believe, therefore, that the most likely mix of a green growth strategy for a developing country will be a combination of a lot of emphasis on large-scale adaptation investments that I began with talking about. And mostly these are kind of downplayed in a lot of the international discussions, but not in developing countries. In the international discussion, there's much more stress on the new technologies, but in developing countries, there should be a lot more stress on the adaptation investments, new forms of terrace agriculture, for example, new forms of embankments, sewage systems, new forms of housing. These are technologies that developing countries can actually benefit from implementing. They have the technologies, but here we have to work more on the state failure of large-scale public investments suffering from a lot of corruption and leakage. And we have methods of doing that, and those strategies are likely to be both aligned with development and dealing with the effects of climate change. And then there also has to be another component of very carefully selected component manufacturing, which is the linking the developing country into these global chains where investments in mitigation technologies, the new technologies, come in. And here, what we are cautioning is that it shouldn't simply be about importing these technologies, because importing benefits the importers and the installers, but it's a one-off gain. And in the long run, the developing country might actually not benefit very much. from such a strategy. So the trick is not to get trapped into a very glamorous greening program, where when you look at the detail, it is simply a kind of loan-based, debt-based importing of technologies developed elsewhere. I think there is a win-win strategy in developing countries. We are working on this, but I think this is more complex, but there are very many important opportunities here. I'll stop there and pass it on to my colleague, Dr. Roy.
Thank you, Professor Khan. What I will now do is, Professor Khan laid the framework out for us, and I'm going to try and fit in some of the specifics as we understand to the Nepali context here. I just want to present a few Nepal-specific statistics here in terms of Nepal's own emissions and the losses tabulated so far due to climate change. Now, Nepal, we all know it's a small country. It might be a hugely complex country, but in terms of climate change, or rather contribution to climate change, Nepal contributes only about 0.027% of GHG emissions. But unfortunately, and we've all talked about this in terms of the nature of this sort of global externality of climate change, it is at the receiving end of climate change related degradation, and is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change, given where it is in terms of geography, in terms of climatic locations. It doesn't really matter that Nepal contributes only 0.027%. And climate-induced extreme changes are estimated to have directly cost Nepal in the range of between US $270 to 360 million till about 2015. And it is actually anticipated that losses could mount to as much as US $62.384 billion, or 2 to 3% of GDP by 2050. That really lays out the scale of challenge that we have. We have the effect of climate change on Nepal. We have the magnitude in terms of losses. And we also have the added complexity that Professor Khan spoke about of being an LIC, which has peculiar political economy and geopolitical considerations. So this is at a particularly vulnerable, Nepal is at a particularly vulnerable level of its economic growth. And unfortunately, the pandemic has been brutal across South Asia. And we think that Nepal and India are actually have been more adversely affected. Nepal is at a lower growth trajectory, and the pandemic is going to make it economically more vulnerable. So anything that we say in terms of sustainable green growth also has to look at the word sustainable first. Green growth is not what we are after. It has to be sustainable. So for us, any kind of climate change policy, environmental sustainability has to be inclusive. It has to help Nepal in the process of structural transformation. And as economists, we know what the process of structural transformation means. It's when you move from low productivity, very labor-intensive sectors to higher productivity sectors. But in the case of countries like Nepal, like India, like Bangladesh, it also means that we need this structural transformation to be employment generating. The Nepal job diagnostics that the World Bank has done shows that's the most critical. There are not enough jobs going around for the level of skills in the country. And this is something that we want to stress on. Anything that's about green growth and sustainable has to be holistic. It has to be realistic, take into account state capacity or the political reality. And it can't just be about the environment. Do we have the skills? Do we have firms that can employ these skilled people? How do we train these skilled people? And most importantly, how do we create these firms which are going to become high capability to absorb the kind of mitigation technologies that are required for green growth and climate change? And that's an extremely complex process that Nepal is only, I think, beginning to get its head around. So any policy that talks of sustainable goals has to be in this context, meaning that, while environmental friendly policies needs to be definitely adopted to protect citizens, so that's the mitigation part of it, given that Nepal is more vulnerable to climate change and for other reasons that Professor Khan laid out, adaptation is extremely important to the Nepali context. And donors tend to look more at mitigation because there is some amount of a market that they can create for their technology transfer. But for countries like Nepal, adaptation actually has to be much more on the policy table than just mitigation. But this also makes it easier in one sense to select priority sectors in Nepal. There's already tourism, there is already energy, there's agriculture, forestry, transportation. Saja Yatayat is a very good example. If you're looking for good practices and benchmarks, it's a great example of cooperative. Yes, there have been bumps along the way, but these are lines along which that we could move, and these are conducive to green growth. But all policies have to really be designed keeping in mind two factors, which is the current politics, or how, as we define it when we work with our colleagues in PEI and Professor Khan and me in SOAS, is what we call the political settlement, which doesn't mean that there is an agreed negotiated deal, but that you have to keep in mind the distribution of power. What is the politics of this particular reform in green growth that we are going to implement? Are there going to be people who are going to be adversely affected and then come out and put a stop to it? Are there going to be people who actually look at this policy as something that's in their interest and come forward and enforce it and make that policy successful? So all these considerations need to be kept in mind. Climate change anywhere is fraught, whether it's in the UK or whether it's in Nepal, but a developing country has its own set of imponderables. So I talked about these sectors, and I know that a lot of experts actually feel that hydropower, hydroelectricity is in the Nepali context a very sort of positive trajectory. But we would like to put in a word of caution there that given the sort of seismic prone area that Nepal is in, given the problems that we might have of glacial melt, it might be an idea to temper expectations of hydel to be a big contributor to the green growth economy. And also, if you're looking at it in terms of employment generation or even the redistribution, we've had these instances of employment only being available during the construction phase, and during redistribution, if you're talking about shares being held by the community, even that has not, and a lot of literature has gone into this in Nepal, but even that has not been very, very successful. We've had this instance of Jhola Mein Khola in Nepal, and that's not really where you want to go to. You want it to be much more self-sustaining. You want it to be much more inclusive. So these are things that one needs to keep in mind. When we say reforms, what do we mean by reforms? There are many internationally accepted benchmarks. As I said, one of these was that hydropower is a great way to go for developing countries like Nepal, but that might be a good international benchmark. In the Nepal context, is that the way to go forward? So we are talking about targeting sectors, targeting policies at sectors very, very specifically. So we target to keep in mind sectors where change is feasible, but also to address issues like low-income countries in Nepal have, which is essentially the problem of structural transformation, productivity growth, and employment generation. We know that this migration and remittance-dependent economy is uncertain, and the pandemic has taught us that in the Nepali context. It's not something that we can depend on. The alternative has to be sustainable domestic job creation, and that is something that the sustainable transformation, keeping green growth in mind, has to consider. But we also know this is the other second problem in Nepal, and it's not just a Nepal specific problem, it's across the developing economies. But in Nepal, we know that it's a low productivity economy. The capacity for technological diffusion is relatively low, and we have lots of evidence for this. The export basket is low. The country has a small and shrinking manufacturing base, and this was true even prior to COVID. And you go by any survey of the Nepali form, the identification of constraint is key, of competition as a constraint is key for all Nepali firms. For whatever reasons, and it's a complex set of reasons, Nepali firms aren't competitive enough or feel they aren't competitive enough to compete with firms in China, in India, in Bangladesh. And that's something that absolutely critically needs to be solved before we can start thinking about green growth. But this means two things. The good thing is that there is a small industrial base, which means green policies are less likely to face resistance from entrenched, established industries, which already have sunk investments in old technologies. But this also means that there is a bad side to this same issue, which is that the same large firms with sunk costs and old technologies might not be willing to adopt these new technologies because there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of effort, and the IFI might come with a conditionality saying, well, if you don't develop this technology, we take the money back. That's not something the big firms might want to take on. And that's where we need an entirely different policy of creating small, productive small and medium enterprises. That's not something Nepal has actually very actively pursued. And we feel that's a big policy gap. It's a challenge, as well as an opportunity. And where does climate finance fit into all of this? Now, general support for finance or raising finance for green projects might not be very effective if they have not been designed for specific types of firms and sectors. Now, under the UNFCCC, there are lots of financing commitments. Nepal is part of a lot of financing commitments. The EU is one of the largest financiers. But a general, as we call a horizontal sort of environment for climate finance is not going to achieve the kind of aims that we began with. So yes, policy subsidies might be necessary. They're important. Developing countries have used policies extensively. But if the policy is going to be, if the policy is continued for a long period of time, then it actually makes any finance policy for green growth unsustainable. Subsidies should only be provided when we know that the subsidy is going to be used in a positive way, that the outcome is going to be productive. If that's not possible, then the subsidy is not a successful one. So therefore, this is what we mean by universal green finance isn't going to help. Very politically realistic, whether it delivers the outcome of better technology and better employment, that is something that we need to design into climate finance. So what is important is the design of the lending. Is it targeted to feasible technologies? Can repayment conditions be enforced in that particular distribution of power so that you have a broad swathe of firms that can actually increase their productive capabilities and provide the employment? So which is why we wanted to actually close, or rather talk to this session about a broader framework and what that might mean for Nepal. So again, for Nepal, we need to think about it in terms of structural transformation, in terms of creating a broad base of very capable firms that can respond to the mitigation effects of climate change, and where adaptation is concerned, where the green finance for adaptation is actually, it can be enforced, and people who are getting the finance can be disciplined into not just repaying it, but using it productively. And therefore, you're actually talking about skills generation programs, firm capability development programs, as well as finance designing programs together, which means that we're thinking about green growth, not just as environmental green growth, but in a much more broad manner that's actually very relevant to Nepal's structural transformation and to Nepal's need. So I'm going to stop here, and if there are any questions, Professor Khan and I will be very happy to answer them. Thank you. Thank you, Pramodji. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'm sharing Professor Moll's article.
Hello.
Sir, I'm sharing it. Just seconds.
Yeah. Can I go ahead?
Yes, sir. Please go.
Okay. A very good afternoon to all of you in this nice International Study Convention 2021. Thank you very much for our organizer to invite me to speak on these things. And thank you for also Professor Mrutyunjay Mishra
I think Professor Moll got disconnected, so I think we should move to the next panel. Dr. Chandrasekhar Vinapati, would you like to start, sir?
Okay, fine.
Yes, please.
Professor Mal, any problem?
He got disconnected, sir. So maybe we'll start in a while.
So can I start?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes, Chandra, you carry on.
Okay, so is it visible?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Okay, thanks. So good afternoon to everyone. So thanks to the organizer for inviting me, and also, in fact, I'd like to thank Professor Mishra to give an invitation to present on this seminar. So I'd like to talk mostly on the climate change, farmers' adaptive behavior and well-being, and evidence from studies in India. And mostly, I'd like to talk, since he's a Himalayan, so he has told me that I will focus on the Himalayan states in part of India. So I'd like to show that. So how many studies are being conducted in the Himalayan states, but mostly the northeastern states of India. So as you know that, as everyone have knowledge that agriculture provides some major employment, and also over the years, the share of the GDP has been declining. Mostly around, if you look at the census information, so you'll find that around half of the rural households are depending on agriculture for their major livelihood. So there are two types of risk in the agriculture. One is the loss of production. There's a market distortion. So we are basically linking the loss of production with respect to the climate change. So there's yield loss is basically occurs because of multiple factors like climatic aberration, like climate variability, drought, flood, and cyclone storms. So if you look at the literature emerging in the last 2 decades, the individual studies starting from Kavi Kumar, so many authors. So they, all of them categorically found that there's a negative impact on Indian agriculture from the climate change. So I've just quoted one study, which basically tells that there's expected to decline 4.8%, maybe to go up to 25% in 2050. So mostly it affects both the food and nutrition security in diverse ways. So as you know that rural households are facing both kind of idiosyncratic and covariate risk, given the other kind of risks are already there in the rural households. So the climatic shocks make them more vulnerable. So given that since are linking with the sustainable development goals, you'll see that it affects few sustainable development goals, that's poverty, zero hunger, health and well-being, reduced inequalities, responsible consumption and production, life and land. So the recent, if you look at the recent survey done by the NSSO in 2013-14, it was asked all the farmers, the surveyed farmers, are given a chance whether to leave the agriculture. At least half of the Indian farmers are unwilling to continue farming in future. They're basically willing to leave farming in future, okay, because of different kinds of risks. So now the major question, policy question, is the providing sustainable livelihood opportunity. That's basically minimizing the volatility in agricultural income. The one answer is basically providing the sustainable livelihood opportunity. The answer is that agriculture innovation. Okay. The agriculture innovation means adoption of climate smart agriculture practices or adaptation of soils. So many studies, including my own study and many studies, look at the meta-analysis paper in 2014. So they found that suppose you adopt, definitely there will be a reduction of the impact on agriculture or productivity will increase or reduce the impact. So over the years, the government of India has taken several innovative steps, basically with respect to the adoption, which I have mentioned, given the time constraint I'm having, so I'll not go through everything. Recently, we have drafted few policies like Pradhan Mantri Kisi Sinchai Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, Soil Health Card, Agromet Advisory Services, e-NAM, and Pradhan Mantri Kisan Saman Nidhi. So, but over the years, what we basically found that given there is a supply side intervention. The government is advising people to adopt different kinds of innovative technologies. It is found that there is a low adoption among the farmers. So basically, it gives the right question to many researchers, including myself, to identify why the farmers are not adopting. What are the adaptation measures that are available, and what are the things that farmers are adopting? The baskets of adaptation measures are available to the farmers, and what are the things basically farmers are adopting, and why they're not adopting. So that's why many studies have emerged over the years. There's many studies, around 100 studies are emerged over the years in last 10 to 15 years. But there's a gap in with respect to the systematic review in terms of what are the adaptation measures farmers are adopting, which are the adaptation measures are common across the states in India, because we are living country like India, we are living in the diverse climatic conditions. So maybe the adaptation measures which are basically suitable in northeastern part of India may not be suitable in Kerala or the Maharashtra or maybe the Gujarat. Okay, so therefore it's required to systematic review, looking at the across the states, what kind of adaptation measures are being adopted and which is mostly common across the states and which are basically diverse across the states. And the second objective is to look at the determinants. What are the factors basically influencing farmers to adopt? So basically what we have done here, we have basically adopted a systematic review approach. That's basically the PRISMA approach. Preferred reporting item for systematic review and meta-analysis. So there will be 4 categories, 4 phases of doing that. Basically, we formulate the research question that farmers are adopting. So what are the adaptation measures that farmers are adopting? What are the adaptation measures that basically Indian farmers are undertaking to climate change? That's the basically the main question we are having. So then basically the identification that to identify the articles, okay, to identify the articles from the right search engine. Then after the identification, we have to identify both inclusion and exclusion criteria, which I'm going to explain now. And then basically we are going to the abstract and the full text, basically select the studies. If you look, so first step, so as I mentioned that we have a research question. Based on that research question, we have identified few keywords. These keywords basically searched in the search engine, that's the Web of Science, Gesture, Science Direct, EBSCO, and SET journals. We have searched these keywords and identified the papers. Okay, once we have identified, basically once we have done that, we have ended up with 19,419 papers. So what we have done now, we have to basically look at that. Because since we are searching for the different search engines, there's high chance, high likely that some papers might have appeared in 2 times or 3 times. Now we have to check the duplicate. So once you have checked that, we have just basically remove 3,000 articles, around 3,000 articles. Now we are basically end up with 16,361 articles. So now basically we are looking at the inclusion and exclusion criteria. We include the papers, those are basically published in journal, basically empirical research articles. We exclude all the review articles, books, chapters, and we focus on the English. And the time period of choosing 2001 to 2018. These papers are published, and countries mostly focus on India. We're looking at the title and abstract. Basically, once we're done that, we're looking at the title and abstract, looking at whether this paper has focused on the agricultural adaptation measures. And then when coming to the full article screening, we're basically looking at the determinants of adaptation options and barriers of undertaking adaptation options. So once we basically end up with 16,000 articles, so now basically we have excluded many articles out of the 16,000 articles based on the first 3 criteria. Okay, up to the country like India. Okay, basically adopts the first 4 criteria. So we are end up with the 287 articles. Now, out of the 287 articles, we have gone through the abstract. See that whether these articles are focusing on whether these words, agriculture, farm level adaptation, farmers' adaptive behavior, coping strategies, climate change extreme, whether these words are appeared in the abstract. If these words are not appearing in the abstract, we just remove them. And out of the 50 articles. And the 50 articles have gone through the full test, see that whether this article is mostly focusing on the climate change adaptation, farmers' adaptation behavior, other determinants. And end up with the 44 articles. So these are the articles published over the years. If you see that in 2018, there are around 11 articles published. Or 2010, there's 3 articles, and over the years starts increasing. Basically, as you know, that in the Bali conference in 2007, which first time we basically give focus on the adaptation. That after that, there's many articles emerge across the scholarly communities to basically looking at the adaptation measures. If you look at the number of papers focusing on the quantitative and qualitative, a single state or more than one state will find that 27 papers are qualitative and 70 papers are quantitative, basically use the some kind of quantitative methodology. So whether the papers are mostly focused on the quantitative methods or cross-section or panel, so mostly papers are focused on the cross-section. And looking at the state where the basically articles are emerging, so you'll see that state-wise, I have categorized that, okay, how many articles you got from the where. So now the question is, now the point is here, if you look at the northeastern states, there are few articles. There are maximum, I have identified out of the 44, maximum by 3-4 articles from the northeastern states. Although there is diverse, some of them earlier talked about the diverse climate in the northeastern states, but surprising to me that we have only 4 articles which basically talk on the climate change adaptation in the northeastern states. Even I have I've checked with again with the HIMAP report, which is basically published by the ECMOD 1 or 2 years before. So I checked the reference bibliography of that report to see that whether I have missed any articles. But I have identified that still there is a less number of articles in the northeastern states. That's basically I just want to point out that although there could be farmers that might have adapting to the climate change in northeastern states, but there's a less number of articles which is basically published in peer-reviewed journals. So basically, after getting the number of adaptation bases farmers are adapting, we basically divide them in different categories. One is the farm management and technology, diversification on and beyond the farm, farm financial management, government-supported generic and disaster risk reduction measures, knowledge management network, and civil society. Okay, so looking at that, you'll see that most of the studies are mostly focusing on the farm management and technology. Around 91% of technology focus on farm management technology, is the farm level adaptation measures. Okay, there's a less number of studies are talking about the government-supported generic and disaster risk reduction measures, or knowledge management network, or civil society-supported adaptation measures. So if you look at that state-wise classification, you see that northeastern states, let's just look at the northeastern states, you will find nowhere is reported. This means that very less articles. I just want to point out that very less number, at least maximum 3-4 articles are published in the northeastern state. That's basically the message or conclusion I just want to give that. So it's required the more research in the northeastern states to know that. So what kind of adaptation measures are undertaken by the farmers living in the northeastern states? So if you look at basically I've categorized them based on the farm management technology article focused on which are the adaptation measures. So basically looking at the which kind of adaptation measures are basically most researched, you'll find that water management. Of course, water management is a major issue across the states in India. That's why most of the papers are focused on the water management. That's like 24 papers are focused out of the 44 papers, 24 papers are focused on the water management and crop diversification. And so mostly if you look at the knowledge management or the government interventions, there are less number of articles focused on. So also it seems that most of the papers are mostly focused on the farm management technology and other adaptation measures. Beyond the farm management, we have having the less number of articles talking about the other adaptation measures. If you look at the northeastern states, they are having the less number of articles. So there is so apart from that, then I was looking at what basically influenced farmers to adapt. Again, we have done another kind of systematic review. Okay, following the same approach on the few keywords. By doing this, so basically we have searched in the Web of Science. Web of Science we have basically searched. Basically we are looking at we identified the 183 articles, end up with the 35 articles. Basically, 29 papers sourced from the Web of Science, focus on the farm level adaptation. Then basically we have done without whether we have missed some articles during a search. So basically, we have gone through some of the bibliography of the identified papers and see that, okay, whether we have missed, and we have identified that, yes, we have missed the 6 papers that we basically saw included in that, basically based on the Hunt search citation, end up with the 35 papers. And here we have a 12 quantitative and 23 qualitative papers. So these are the basically looking at the determinants. I've just categorized them. Okay, which are the determinants? I've taken that independent variables of these papers. Those are basically 12 papers. So that basically focused on the quantitative papers. So most of the determinants are climate change and shocks, and socioeconomic characteristics and household head and household head, and access to institutions. You see that although we are talking about adaptation measures, most of the studies are not taking climate change as one of the independent variable, one of the confounder. Okay, most of the studies, because we have to prove that, okay, whether farmers are adopting this particular adaptation measure because of climate change or climate sensitive adaptation. Because most of the studies are taking mostly the household and household characteristics and access to institutions. Okay, and the other characteristics, basically risk assessment behavior, is not basically ignored in the most of the few studies have taken that. So that basically I put here. So most of the studies, you'll see that most of the studies are focusing on the household and household head characteristics rather than the other factors. And even the only 6 studies are focusing on the climate change and extreme events. And even 3 studies have taken the perception. Okay. So looking at the systematic review, the qualitative papers, the 23 papers we have. So 11 papers are talking about the climate variability, 3 papers talking about both climate variability and extreme events, 8 papers focus on drought, and 1 paper is talking about the cyclone, storm, and flood. Basically, we have summarized them, all the papers. So what we basically have observed that the major constraints are lack of knowledge about the adaptation option, the new varieties of seeds, soil conservation techniques, and water management options, credit, wealth, climate information, shortage of input, access to agriculture extension, or access to market as the major determinants, a major constraint for taking adaptation measures. Okay, so now the question is, I have a major question here. What I've done, I've taken all the studies and see that, okay, how many villages they have surveyed, combination of, because suppose Uttarakhand, suppose there are 5 studies. I just look at, okay, how many villages they have surveyed, how many households they have surveyed. Okay, so since that combining all the studies, okay, the result we are having, the answer we have having, that is basically based on the research conducted in the 15 villages and 90 household survey. So now my question is, based on a small survey and small village and small household survey, whether we can generalize these findings for the entire state. Okay, see that in Odisha, the total survey was 136 villages combining of all 14 studies. And the total household survey combining all 14 studies, 4,432. So 4,432 households. So now the question is, given there's a less number of villages surveyed across the states, whether we can generalize the findings for the entire state, which is questionable. So what basically we have identified the major findings. First, evidence found that for 18 states, there's a limited or no research for remaining states. Among these, a large part of studies are focused on Odisha and the Pradesh Bihar. Only 1 or few studies have been noticed for the rest. There are in fact having a dearth of studies with large samples that can represent the state as a whole. So we therefore advocate to carry out the several research studies across the Indian states, particularly considering large samples. And major emphasis on farm management technology. So beyond the state-wise research studies for each adaptation category, it is demonstrated that there is a dearth of studies in several Indian states, including the northeastern states. And mostly practiced adaptation measures across the states are water management, crop diversification, crop choice, altering agriculture practices and systems, changing cropping calendar and land holiday, diversification of livelihood and income. So looking at the determinants, okay, so what basically we have found that non-climatic factors like demographic characteristics, asset, income, education, dependence on agriculture, farm characteristics, access to finance and institutions are observed as major motivating factors. A limited studies established causal relations between climate change, extreme events, and farm adaptation options. Lack of research with respect to climatic factors, perception and risk attitude behavior, and government policies. Now, another thing we have identified, although the behavioral economics discourse has a lot to do with human behavior, little research and no research has been taken off in climate change adaptation research in India so far. So that's basically my paper, and we have published 2 papers recently. And if anyone are interested, they can go through these papers. Thank you.
Now let me run the slide of Professor Moll. Professor Moll, are you ready?
Hello, yes, I am ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, it is networking problem. Actually, network has gone down from GSU. So that am I able?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
And can I go?
Yes,
Hello,
sir.
can you move? Okay, okay. Then good afternoon to all of you. Now, second time I'm speaking. So maybe it will be without interrupted on climate change and Indian subcontinent perspective. So next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So this is presentation is about no previous slide. Yeah. So IPCC, this assessment report 6 we are talking about mainly. So how, if you remember, we have in 1990, it was assessment report 1 was happened, and that time it is now 6 assessment report comprises of 3 working group. You see, first working group is physical science basis, and second is impact, adaptation, and vulnerability. And third is about talking about mitigation and adaptation. How we have moved forward is now from 1990 to 2021, and from very likely to like now we are accepting all the reports. Next slide. Yeah. So now it is accepted and fully agreed by our scientists and policymakers around the globe. Humans are to blame about the whole this changing happen. As you see, just in unequivocal human influence that warmed our atmosphere, ocean, and land. So if you remember and go back, 6 July 1799, first time French envoy Louis Otto announced about the Industrial Revolution. This Industrial Revolution started for the betterness of our development, betterness of society, and other things. But after 200, 300 years, we felt that this is actually harmed also our environment. And in India, as you remember, after 1990 and 1910, we have started our industry mainly about where it is cloth sector or energy sector or agriculture sector, or industry or transport. So now mainly worldwide, we have greenhouse emission from energy sector about 35%, and from agriculture is 24%, industry 21%, and around 14% about transport that is influencing our environment. Next slide. Actually, this is the India report on greenhouse gas emission by the sector. You see, 68% greenhouse emission when 2014 it is actually calculated. 68% from energy sector, and around 20% from agriculture sector, and from industrial process is 6%, and land use changes and process is 3.8%, and other these positive emissions reported from different sectors. And as you see how GDP our increases from 1990 to 2014. So at the side by side, our this greenhouse gas emission also emitted increases. As you see, from GDP side by side, energy sector is contributing more on this pollution mode. So this report was 2018 by FAO state team. Next slide. So this see now each our linear increase in global surface temperature was due to this CO2 emission, this gigaton CO2. Each 100 GT CO2 of cumulative CO2 likely to increase 0.27 degrees centigrade of temperature to 0.6 degrees centigrade. And you see this is SSP 1.9, SSP 1.2. This is IPCC 6 report saying new pathway. This SSP stands for shared socio-economic pathway. As you remember in previously report SERC, that is based on the basically economic and our emission and other criteria, that now this shared socio-economic pathway SSP is 5 thing included: how population is changing, economic growth, education, urbanization, and the rate of technological development. As you see how this carbon dioxide increasing in atmosphere and temperature is increasing now, and how it is going to increase after 2020. You see about SSP 1.9, 2.6, 4.5 other scenario. So there is linear relationship we found from CO2 emission to temperature. As you see. So next slide. So see, this is the in mid of our century how 1.5 degrees centigrade global warming is showing, and how the 2 degrees centigrade will be reported in our mid century, and 4 degrees centigrade. Also, how rainfall is going to change due to simulated 2 degrees centigrade, and changing from some area will be 10 to 40% increase of rainfall, as you see, mainly over India in due to 4 degrees centigrade. In India, as you see, west part of the country, over Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Mumbai, we have maybe 20 to 30% increase of rainfall, maybe will be in future. And in 2 degrees centigrade scenario, it will be more on same area in western part of our country in India, and also you see northern part of Nepal, and India and Pakistan will be suffered. Western part of India and Pakistan will be more rainfall, and due to that more flooded condition. And you see the in 4 degrees centigrade scenario also in global warming, due to that more and more increase of more than 40% rainfall increase showing in over Pakistan, Afghanistan, and western part of Indian country, also north part. And in 4 degrees scenario, we can see over Nepal also, and 4 degrees scenario Nepal also, there is witness about 20 to 30 degrees centigrade, 20 to 30% increase in precipitation. Sorry. And this global warming, every increment of 1 degree centigrade will be highly impacted on precipitation, and also our soil moisture change in the land. So next slide. See, weather is getting extreme, as you're seeing. Also, we are experiencing our extreme heat wave become more frequent, as IPCC 6 report is saying, and that due to that extreme heat waves, severe heat waves, and extreme temperature, these forest fire cases is increasing, as you see from USA to Australia and other India and other part of world. And also we have seen the several flooded condition in around the world due to this intense rainfall is increasing, and it's only going to intensify in future, what this report is saying. And also heavy rainfall events are now 1.3 times more likely and 6.7% more wetter. So this is very grim situation for, as you're seeing, is this year, and flooding condition of all over the world. And tropical cyclone, due to as Arabian Sea temperature is going to increase, as IPCC report is saying. So our cyclone is also getting stronger by day. And you see last 2-3 years of Indian subcontinent witnessing several cyclones, and they are very much destroying to our population and our property in our place. So now, how climate change impacts this high competence that many important agricultural region will be affected by the drought and extreme rains. And so also the risk of fires, heat waves, drought will affect the human form of weather and food insecurity and energy insecurity. So as IPCC report is said, if you stabilize about 1.75 degrees centigrade, so we are going to stop getting much worse. This is only optimistic scenario. So next slide. Next. Yeah. So now IPCC report also focusing on how we are going from global climate information to regional climate information. As you see, as the level of basin, river basins, or small basins, or agroclimatic zone wise, are in different type of climatic zone wise, or in a small regional basis, how we can do, because like Indian summer monsoon is affected by the different our warming of Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal. They are affecting also the formation of tropical cyclone, or they are going to affecting also drought in India and Nepal also. So these type of monsoon calculation we need to by regional basis, how the regional climate information is more needed, and now focusing on that. Next slide. So if you see AR6 for India, this key insight we have seen. Indian summer monsoon has weakened in the as seen in last 30-40 years, and significant changes observed in recent decades. Also, negative trend of Indian summer monsoon had been observed and seen by different data sets of last 60-70 years. An increasing trend in heavy precipitation, intense rainfall, more than 100 millimeter or 200 millimeter per day is increasing. However, low to moderate rainfall is decreasing. As you've seen in last 100-year rainfall data we have from 1901 to 2020. An increase in widespread extremes over South Asian monsoon during this time. So Arabian Sea, we have seen the witnessing the warming of Arabian Sea and intensification of irrigation water management. As already several studies reported that our irrigated environment, due to, as you see, the new type of canal is now making by the governments, or new type of irrigation pattern and new type of technology, due to we are irrigating our crops by groundwater. So this is changing the overall circulation in a agroclimatic area or basin area. So this irrigation water is affecting in a term of this ancient monsoon system also. So this is several studies going on how the irrigation water is affecting our South Asian monsoon or monsoon system. So more and more thing will emerge in coming days. And also we have witnessing the aerosol mainly in winter season, witnessing the increasing of aerosols by different sources, and predominantly observed declined in Indian summer monsoon also due to this aerosols, increasing aerosols. And also we have seen the drying of soil moisture because in summer season, more heat wave and more severe heat wave we're witnessing. So it is now very much that drought in Northwest India and part of Peninsular India are observed. So Northwest India is missing too much and too little water, as you see. We going to witness more drought in Northwest India and also more flooding condition in Northwest India. Both way, it is due to in monsoon season we have a flood season, and before that is around too many days. Means if you have 3 months monsoon system, we have more drought, more less water days, and also due to intense rainfall, we have a more wetter days also witnessing. We are going to witness that. Next slide. So as you see, our snow cover as Gangotri area of Himalaya system advancing is reduced in Hindu Kush Himalaya and during last in early 20th century, and also witnesses in last 30-40 years from 1970. More of this glacial mass reduced and thin and retreated. So this is also enhancing our sea level rise. As you see in several reports, we have sea level rise, as you see in reports from 1901 to 2015. In Mumbai, this IPCC report are saying also other report. Mumbai witnessing 0.58 millimeter increase in our sea level, and in Chennai it is 0.57 millimeter of sea level rise, and Kolkata 0.15 millimeter. So see the retreat of snow and then increasing of our previous slide. Yeah, previous slide. No, previous. Yeah, so okay. So 1 minute only. So as you see, our cities, how we are going to increase due to urbanization, as you see in Kathmandu, or our Chennai, our Dhaka, or in Islamabad, or Delhi, or Mumbai, it is going to. So we have seen, study shows that metro city is going to be more affected by this heat island conditions. Kolkata, as you see, in a study saying from 1950 to 2015, Kolkata temperature increased about 2.6 degrees centigrade. To see that this very how heat island of this Kolkata. So this type of witnessing the several our cities, how cities is going to due to urbanization, unhabitual urbanization, how it is going to affected by the climate change. So virtually uncertain. This is certain that number of warm days and night is going to increase. So this is next slide. So more perspective on Indian point of view. Next slide. Next. Yeah. So this is diurnal temperature range. We are witnessing what to see the index. Previous slide. This is diurnal temperature range, as you're saying that you see the increasing trend in DTR, diurnal temperature range. You see difference between maximum temperature and minimum temperature. Or you can say daytime temperature and nighttime temperature, difference between that. This is increasing during 1951 to 2016, but we've seen that it is from 1991 from 2016 is decreasing. Mainly declining of DTR witnessed the turbulent temperature range in northwest and part of Gangetic Plain and northeast and central India. And this is due to the, you see, maximum increase in minimum temperature. Minimum temperature is last 30 years, 30 years, increasing more than maximum temperature. Also, we're witnessing the declining solar radiation, probably increase of DTR. So this type of things are going to increase, going to affect on major way of our agriculture system, health system mainly. So this monsoon system is seeing more in terms of the next slide. Next. We're talking about this heat wave and severe heat wave. We have witnessed that our heat wave and severe heat waves are going to increase in future. And mainly we are witnessing that north, western, central and south central India in more heat waves there. So this is new area of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. We are witnessing that more and more heat wave was witnessing the from last 1950 to 2016 where we studied. Also is projected that the South India will have more heat wave and severe heat wave, and also eastern coastal states will be affected by the heat waves. So you see this is a very grim situation for our health system and agriculture system. Next slide. Next. Okay. So this, as you see, this figures saying out the special distribution of aerosol optical depth and how extreme biomass burning emission over Indo-Gangetic Plain is going to increase. So this is the you see the figure. So last 20 years, how aerosol is increasing due to extreme biomass burning emission, presence of absorbing aerosol, low aerosol layer height, other things. So this height wise, you can see from here to upper atmosphere. So different type of content of these aerosols are affecting our health and agriculture. So next slide. Next. Okay. So also we have seen that impact of extreme temperature and aerosols. Previous slide, previous. Yeah. How our temperature and aerosol are going to affect on wheat crop. So we found that this northern part of country, northern hill zone will be more affected by the combined effect of climate and aerosol in India, and that is there published in the Air Pollution Journal. So we need to adapt about aerosol and extreme temperature, how wheat yield is going to be stabilized by that, adapting that. So rising of temperature and wheat yield across India is vastly inconsistent or highly uncertain, integrated with compound effect of aerosols. Next slide. So next, as you see, the our increasing temperature and also due to in future, mainly so this sugar content or sugar mass, sugar content or sugar mass is going to decrease in future. As you see, we need to increase our sugar production around the world because due to witnessing of our to feeding our ever increasing population. But this is also we found that in future also sugar content is going to decrease due to increased temperature and other climate change conditions. Next slide. And also it is very important that how extreme temperature and air pollution is going to impact on health. We found that daily mortality increase due to heat wave conditions and extreme temperature. Diurnal temperature range is also in increasing mortality. and significant effect of out of this new black carbon aerosol and NO2 and PM2.2 mortality. Mortality is increasing due to this black carbon increase in atmosphere. And also survey reports of a study in India in Varanasi in several wards I found that this temperature or this air pollution is very much impacting children health. Our pediatric health is affected by this study. And also Japanese encephalitis was increased in northern part, you see Gorakhpur area, this is nearer to Nepal. The Japanese encephalitis association with several its temperature and solar rays. And this due to this temperature increase, this is maybe Japanese encephalitis may be aggravated and increased. Next slide. So as a simple way in one slide, this we can see, as you also said that the South Asian precipitation is going to project to increase, and monsoon extremes and other are projected to increase in future. Also high engagement that flood frequency and magnitude is going to increase in future. Extreme heat wave are because also increase and going to increase in future also, and more frequent and intense heat wave will be observed in Indian subcontinent by the end of 21st century. So dangerous stress threshold of 41 degrees centigrade, more than that, is expected to be extended by 50 to 150 days over India. This is by IPCC report. Next slide. Yeah, so mountain, as you see, in future also mountain glacier will continue to shrink and permafrost to thaw in all regions, and also mountain glacier are projected to lose more mass. This is very, and also crop variability, as you see, reduction in groundwater nut reel were found in our parts of India. Kolkata may experience maybe already increased 2.6 degrees centigrade last 50 years. Maybe witness 4.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature between 2081 to 2100. It's very, and also with a rise of 60 centimeter point sea level in the Sundarbans under the worst condition of scenario, which is 60 centimeter with 0.6 meter sea level rise is maybe going to increase in 2013-2000. And also we Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, and this Visakhapatnam are projected to be more suffered by due to this Indian coastal city, due to increased sea level rise. So as you see, the migration will be there by the person, how this will be also impacting our national security and also different type of security of reasons. So next slide. So as you see, this several things are our temperature is going to increase, extreme temperature, heat wave, or cold wave, or intense rainfall is going to increase, and less rain is going to decrease, and also cyclone number of cyclone and intensity of cyclone is going to be affected. So this is very good situation. So we are running out of time, as you see, as you in meeting of Paris Agreement in way back 2015. So limiting warming of 1.65 degrees centigrade we have already achieved, and you see it's very difficult to achieve these things. So we need to focus more on that, how it is going to do. So policymakers maybe more and more do on this. And we have already 400 billion ton more than we can be added in this carbon budget. So human invest global environment can be limited to specific by limiting CO2 emission. But already we have reached a tipping point. So it is very necessary to focus on that, our policymakers. Next slide. So we longer term, as you see, we think about the early action and mitigation technology, how our technology, our education sector can help. So mitigate this, how our emission can be less in due to land use, food system, energy and transport and consumption. So cost and burden on land and enable longer term ecological restoration with adaptation and mitigation program. Next slide. This is last slide. So as you see, this I'll figure what says. We have in last 100 years we have developed to do these things. Only volcanic eruption is a national phenomena and burning. Otherwise, all things is due to development. So what we have done without knowledge of that, due to development and not knowing about that in last 100 years, our previous policy makers, other things, how we are going to ruin our environment, other things. But now, next slide, next, just click it. Only click it. No, next slide. Then click it only. Only, okay. That, so we have a, click one second. This is slide as a we have done in last 100-year development. This is technological drive and industrialization, other things. So we witness the global warming. Now we need from, and already we are doing a sustainable development, as you see. So we need sustainable development by technological driven, clean development and science driven coping strategies now established going on. So now then we can, now onward we can witness about that cleaner and greener earth. So we can, and this is going to be do by a big, by this, as you see this scenario now presented, science and technology is going to do by big way. So now we can see our science and technology is going to be play a big way to restore our earth system and our environmental and climate can curb on this CO2 and other things, because we have a ever increasing population and industrialization, and already we have a several poor countries we have are developing and least developing countries. We need more and more transportation, more and more industrialization, but this development need to be a sustainable way without increasing or destroying our environment, or without increasing our fuel system or our greenhouse gas emission. So this we can see, we can, science and technology is going to be used by this. So next slide, thank you. Next, last. So thank you very much, it's finished. Next slide, next. Yeah, thank you. So any question we have? Oh.
Pramodji,
Sir, now we can have question and answer, sir. So please take over.
Professor Sanjay is unable to join. Okay.
Sure, sir, no problem.
And I don't have any information of Keshav Singh. I think you better know whether he presenting or not.
So we don't have Keshav Singh. Now we are done with all the presentation. We can have short. We hardly have 9 minutes. So in 9 minutes,
Okay.
we can have discussion. Mr. Sir, there are a few questions coming up from different platforms, so please share it with the speakers. I think Mr. Sir has some problems, so let me take over. There are a few questions that we have received. Like one is on the Facebook, how do we empower decision makers and energy stakeholders to join force and proactively address the challenge of climate change? That is one we have received on Facebook. There's another question that how can India deal with the issue of climate change without hurting its economic interest, or sorry, economic growth? Maybe we can ask Professor Manoj Mishra to comment, or maybe anyone can jump in. So how would you like to go? Manoj sir, would you like to address these two questions? Manoj sir. Professor R.K. Mall, would you like to address these questions?
Sure. If any question.
Sir, please go ahead. There is one more, maybe let me first share it. Do you think climate change can be overcome by NGOs such as Greenpeace, or the role of state, or the role of the state is enough? That is the third question.
What was the first question? I could not remember.
The first question is, how can we empower decision makers and energy stakeholders to join forces and proactively address the challenge of climate change? That is first. Second is, how can India deal with the issue of climate change without hurting its economic growth? That is second. And third is the role of NGOs. Or do we need the role of NGOs like Greenpeace, or state is enough to deal with such issues?
Yeah, we can see these things up two way. First mitigation and second adaptation. Both things go together. So mitigation is also doing by governments, and adaptation is going up different governments, I see. And the mitigation part, as you see, by different governments is a little bit biased about adaptation, because adaptations they can win elections, other things. By mitigation they cannot. So little bit this is going on, but you can witness, as you see, in last 20 years, we witnesses more and more mitigations and technological advances there. We are more energy efficient, automobile industries, coal industry, other industries we have. So, and also adaptation way, we are going to develop different new type of crop varieties, new type of health system, or other, and also different type of things we have. And in this also we are going that governments and multinational agencies, and also national, you are saying NGOs or Greenpeace, other things, they are going together itself. I'm audible? Audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this thing is going on. So policy makers are now little bit more agree than we have witnessing last 10 years. If you go by 2010, then policy makers were not agreed about this climate is changing, or we are going to do. But now 2020, I think governments are more and more realizing this and accepting our things, how we are going to deal with these things. So we can have more and more that coming together, this NGOs and government system. Already they are coming also, as you witnessing, we can see. Industrialists also coming with, as you see in all governments, mainly in India also, public-private partnership is there in every project now. So that are both system. So that is we can sure that we will win this race, and this will be win-win situation for all. Thank you. If you want more.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Pallavi Roy, would you like to comment on it?
May I answer a question?
Sir, we'll come back to you after Dr. Pallavi Roy.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Pramodji. I think I'll take the answer on stakeholders. How do we get stakeholders involved? I think this goes back to the presentation that the two of us made. And it really depends on whether we are designing policy that's in their interest, which can also deliver productive growth and jobs. So it can't just be about people sitting together at the table and having a conversation. Policy design has to be such that you bring on board stakeholders who have the interest and the power to make any changes in policy, and who will then see that a policy that is being made is actually something that they can enforce, and it's the incentive to enforce that policy is very much there. So it's really as simple as that, though it's complex getting people together. So it involves mapping, it involves bringing together the right people and having the right government agencies also on the table. So yes, bringing stakeholders is important, but how you bring them on board and how you engage with them is the critical factor. That's what we would say. Thank you, Pramodji.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Professor Mrutyunjay Mishra, please go ahead.
So far as growth is concerned, a very big question is growth for whom? If we grow at the cost of the society, so what is the use of that growth? Therefore, my hunch is that growth should be there, but it should be a question of sustainable growth. And what we can say, we must think in the line of either Mr. Schumacher, who thought of small is beautiful, or we can follow Gandhian policy for growth that need, not greed. So for that purpose, we can have a sustainable growth path with low carbon emissions. And if we can reduce the carbon emissions, maybe in the beginning it may pay for its own, but in the long run, that will be a sustainable one. That is number one. Number two, you are talking of the involving energy stakeholders. So the energy stakeholders should be given a chance to go for again this shift from fossil fuel to clean and green energy. So maybe it will be less more costly in the initial days, maybe consuming their profit part. But in the later stage, that will pay again and will put the economic growth path in a sustainable manner. Thank you very much.
Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we have come to the end of this session, we would like to express a sincere gratitude and thanks to the Chair for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, we must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live. Thank you for your valuable time and attention, and for making this session productive with your questions. Once again, we are truly honored to have you all with us today. Please do join us in the next session. Thank you so much.